judges. Judges, please introduce yourself according to the tabs. Judge Olamide, can you please introduce yourself first?
Okay, hi everyone. I am Olamide Esther, and I'm going to be a judge in this round. Congratulations on getting to the finals. Wishing you best of luck.
Hi everyone, I'm Scott. Again, congratulations to you for making it this far. So good luck for this round, and all the best.
Hi everyone, Shivani, Mishra, here, panelist for this round. All the best.
Hi everyone, Swapnil here, paneling this round. No perfect pronouns. Good luck with the finals.
Thanks for that wonderful introduction, judges. So, a few house rules before we start. Everyone, firstly, please respect PY and gender preferences. Secondly, after 8 minutes and precisely 15 seconds, any materials will not be recorded. Thirdly, please practice proper decorum in accordance with the equity rules and policies implemented by this tournament. Start a case coming from proposition, calling their first speaker. Here.
Oh, am I audible and visible?
Yes, you are.
Okay, thank you. I'll start my pronouns are she, her. I prefer POIs verbally, and if you could, I would like ask for POIs in my speech. So yeah, okay. So I'll start my speech in three, two, one. Imagine a child that grew up in a family ridden with drug addiction. When they grow up, they know that being a drug addict is inherently wrong and immoral, but they can't help it because it's all they've known. It's all they experienced. It's all they've learned from watching members of their family succumb to addiction. We think this case on Op's side, they would just be completely rejected because other people or other Christians will perceive as though you are born that way, you are meant to sin, while the rest of us are not. We think that that's just inherently wrong, and that's why we're proud to propose. We think that believing in original sin gives these individuals a beacon of hope for change. It gives them a second chance at life, and it also remedies the circumstances that were just simply out of their control. So, for our framing is that first of all, everyone makes mistakes, right? And face the consequences. So this may due to your environment where like maybe you did bad things because of the circumstances that you were in, and maybe you were not inherently bad. For example, this looks like a person in an impoverished community might commit crimes like stealing food, not because they like sinning or they love doing bad things, but because it's essential for their survival. We think another case that this might occur is like if you've had a childhood or if you had a bad childhood. Maybe you were raised by an alcoholic father and you end up being alcoholic because you don't really know any better, or maybe you were fed alcohol when you were younger. But what's important here isn't their mistakes, it's the perception of their actions from other Christians and them themselves. Without the belief of original sin, people will only see one dimension of their actions. So, i.e., oh, you stole, you drank alcohol, and they might stigmatize you for it and ostracize you from the faith, which just erodes your path to change because all they see is that you are a sinner. Right? And they will try and distinguish themselves from you and say, I'm not like that, and therefore I will not be able to empathize with someone who has sin. You cannot find solace in the church or even attempt to change because you're branded as a sinner. But without the belief of original sin, there's something like the poppy syndrome, where the odd ones out are pulled down and they can never change for the better. The other thing that we need to win on is how the individual perceives themselves. So whether getting some religious validation helps their self-esteem and motivates them to change, which is what we believe it can do. So one observation that we believe is that we don't think that people are going to feel some sort of like internal hatred for believing in original sin because in the belief of original sin, everyone is a sinner, which means that everyone is just as susceptible to making mistakes. Everyone is similarly predisposed to making these mistakes just like everyone else. So the most important stakeholder in this debate is that we think are those people who do things that are morally wrong and feel bad about these things, i.e., addiction, substance abuse, or stealing in order to survive, but they can't help it because they're in a circumstance that needs them to commit these crimes. We think that opposition must defend a world where there is no natural tendency to sin, where you sin out of your own volition, not because you were predisposed to it. But yeah, I'll take your POI.
Do you concede that this narrative is exploitative in cases as a cover-up for their own actions in many areas?
We don't think so because we think that like most individuals would obviously have the natural human nature to feel guilt when they do something wrong. Like if I were to steal some of my sister's stuff, I would feel guilty for stealing it. Like we can see that there maybe is a small minority of individuals who maybe are psychopaths, who are sociopaths, but we don't think that they're the majority, the most vulnerable stakeholder in this debate. Because if you were to ask that 10-year-old child living in an impoverished community, stealing to put food for his family, for his little sister in Gaza, would you say that, they're trying to get out of accountability? I don't think so. We think that the standard for this debate is whoever wins on personal perception and social perception wins this debate. So the first argument is that empathy for people who have done wrong things. We think that with original sin, people will get closer to Christianity because we teach everyone forgiveness for their sin, which means people are able to become closer to God. They're able to recognize their own faith because you're not just learning these principles, you are using these principles to empathize with other people who are in different situations than you. You are able to understand them because if you think that, maybe he has sinned, but I am just as susceptible to sinning because of original sin. It means that you're able to understand their situation, learn why it might have compelled them to do these actions, instead of just shunning them and locking them away. We think that perpetrators should also receive empathy, but we're not saying is that there isn't consequences of their crime, but more of understanding that they can change. For example, with support, see things from their perspective, because we think that there is already accountability in the status quo. Like if I commit a crime, I'm going to jail. If I do this, I get like if I'm a child and I steal someone else's stuff, like I get scolded by the teacher. We think that accountability is already in status quo. But what's important here isn't about the accountability. It's about how we enable these people to change, to do better in life and to give them a second chance so that they can become a better person. We also think that this makes religious people more forgiving because they understand that people are born with sin and they can relate to you because they can look back on their own mistakes and think that, oh, maybe I would have done the same thing. And if everyone is the same blueprint of original sin, that essentially means that all mistakes made or sins committed are just completely interchangeable between Christians, and it just depends on luck or the birth lottery as to which one you commit. Second argument is that we embrace change as transformative, not as a change in identity. So the premise of this is that people do things that often cause guilt inside. They do things that they personally feel are morally wrong. But instead of feeling bad about these things and feeling like you're just some unsalvageable being who's never going to be forgiven, the doctrine of Christianity already tells you that you are imperfect in the first place, that you aren't expected to be the perfect, that you aren't expected to do things in one straight line because it's a difficult pursuit to stop sinning. We think uniquely then, people will be more willing to improve themselves and undertake the path to become better people because in their eyes now, because of original sin, everyone has it the hard way. Everyone is just as predisposed. Everyone has the same exact temptation to do bad things. But when you see other people working hard, when you see other people leading morally good lives, instead of feeling like, oh, shucks, like I was just born this way and there's no hope for me, you would see them as an example. You would see them as they've managed to grow past their temptation. They've managed to become better people, even though we are all born with original sin. Therefore, so should I. This looks like about how someone who's an alcoholic might feel hopeless and there's no way out from under their side because there's a problem that's unique to them as an individual. But at a point where you tell people, hey, we're all sinners, we can work towards this being better, that's the point where you're able to free people from these afflictions and where you can alleviate them of their guilt. So I think the comparative on ops side is that in ops world, people don't feel like it's possible to change themselves, where they have a closed mindset because they feel as though their mistakes define them. Maybe they blame the way in which you were born. Maybe they blame themselves. But we think that they're going to be a lot less likely to change or to take the chance to change because that's just how they believe, and they believe that that is who they are, that their mistakes define them, that they are doomed essentially. But on our side, everyone understands that they're all in the same predisposition. where people have bad lives, and what may not be good for you is also not good for other people, which means that you still have hope, you still have belief that you can change, and you are more likely to work to become a better person on our side because we don't completely crush your chance of a second chance. And we think that on a whole, the Christian community would just be more supportive to these individuals on our side because of their values of empathy, while on your side, they'll just shun them for being born that way without even trying to understand their circumstances. And with that, I'm proud to propose.
Thank you for that wonderful speech. Calling the first speaker from side up. Here.
Yeah, I can. Oh, I can be heard, right?
Loud and clear.
Okay. Starting speech in 3, 2, 1. Wait, hold on. Hi. Okay. Starting speech in 3, 2, 1. Prime Minister tries to find faults with original sin, painting gloomy pulpits warning that you're born to corrupt, doomed to fail, and in need of pardon before your first breath. But it's not a crime to believe each child is born curious, to be moral and capable of growth without being stamped flawed. We will never bank our souls on the assumption that we're inherently wicked, and for that, oppose. Before setup and 2 arguments, refutations, and a bit of reframing. Firstly, the first issue we have with their case is this chorus that original sin isn't necessary to act as a beacon of life. Well, let's reframe what original sin actually looks like. Original sin tells people they're born flawed because of someone else's mistakes and that they need saving because they even understand what choice is. They use it to explain evil and justify obedience. They cannot simply brush this off and say it's the minority cases. But they gave you no sort of mechanization as to how this doctrine actually builds better moral agents. And their burden was to actually prove that guilt as a foundation creates lasting virtue. We don't think it does. It just builds fear and dependence. That's not character, that's control. But let's take a look at their let's take a look at their 2 contentions more specifically. In their first argument, they say that original sin gives us a reason to empathize with wrongdoing. That by recognizing we're all born flawed, we become more forgiving, and that people are more likely to take accountability because they're not alone in their failure. But we don't think that logic holds. 1, empathy shouldn't require the assumption that everyone is inherently broken. It should come from recognizing people's complexity, not labeling them defective by default. When you say, "Oh, we're all sinful," you flatten moral nuance on their side. You create blanket forgiveness and no meaningful reflection. Accountability only works when someone owns their choices and believes they could have acted differently, not when you excuse them because, well, everyone's fallen anyways. That doesn't build empathy on their side. Now on to their second idea, where they say that original sin helps us embrace change, that it shows people can be redeemed and transformed. But we think that's a fundamental misread. On their comparative, change isn't celebrated because of who you are. It's required because of what you are supposedly are not. They frame transformation as escape from the sinful nature, not a growth of your character. But real change, the kind that builds lasting virtue, isn't about rejecting yourself. It's about becoming more fully who you are. When you start from the premise that your core is corrupt, you don't grow into identity, you run from it. That's not uplifting on their side of the house. 2, on our counterfactual, we would then reject the idea that people are born already broken. We would then believe human beings start off morally clean with the empathy, curiosity, and the raw capacity for good hardwired from the beginning. So there will be no inherited strains or ancestral guilt haunting their potential. So if they fall short on our side, it's not because they're doomed, it's because the world they grow up in is often unjust. Opposition has to contest this counterfactual on terms of scale of impact. First argument then about why teaching original sin damages self-worth and moral development. I want to characterize at the top of this argument what kind of messaging we're sending to people. What is the signaling effect here, especially children? When we tell them that they are fundamentally flawed from the moment they're born, not because of anything they did, not because of any choice they made, but purely because they exist. We think this is real, it has real tangible consequences for 3 reasons. First, it instills a default setting of shame rather than self-esteem. So from day one, you're told that you're broken, that no matter how kind you are or how hard you try, there's something wrong inside of you that has to be redeemed by something external. That is not humility, that's internalized worthlessness. And what happens when a child grows up under that framework is that moral decisions aren't just made out of conviction, they're made out of fear, out of guilt, out of anxiety that no matter how good you are not good enough. We think that's not spiritual growth, that's spiritual insecurity. But 2, it undermines autonomy and stunts moral maturity. Because when people are told their feelings come from a sinful nature as proposition contests, it teaches them to externalize the blame. I lied because I'm a sinner, not because I made a mistake and I can do better. That means you don't get accountability on their side, they lost on the scale of impact. You don't get what you frame every failure as inevitable. But 3, it limits the ability to experience goodness as intrinsically meaningful. Because look, when every good thing you do is framed as a resisting sin instead of living out of your values, it changes your whole relationship with virtue. You start to see kindness, honesty, and generosity not as like natural human capacities, but as exceptions to a falling rule. What the impact here is simple: in that it drains meaning from morality. It turns flourishing into struggle, and eventually the pressure erodes the joy of simply being good for its own sake. So yeah, even if their side says that this doctrine makes people more morally aware in a sense, we say that awareness is built on fear, not growth, and the long-term psychological trade-offs are far too heavy to justify. Before second argument, go. 3, 2,
Right, sorry,
1.
yeah. If a Christian thinks they're a good person because of their own virtue, what is then stopping them from looking down on someone who they deem is more sinful than them?
Well, the fact is, we already told you how there is many arbitrary factors because you're already born as someone who is, more pure. So the moment in which you grow up, if someone else does more harm as a Christian, then that is on that person's individual. At least the narrative on your side is telling that everyone is born with sin, so therefore everyone is just like is just a sinful person from birth. That is the narrative here that we're trying to oppose here. Second argument then about why it undermines responsibility and fosters unhealthy dependency. Because let's just step back for a second and actually ask what this doctrine teaches about agency. When you tell someone that they are born incapable of goodness without divine intervention, you're not just complimenting on theology. You're shaping how they see themselves, others, and the institutions around them. Okay, 3 major harms under this argument. First, it trains people to rely on external gatekeepers for moral and spiritual worth. If salvation comes from being forgiven for a condition you didn't choose, you're automatically dependent on someone else to be made whole. That often means that church or a religious leader or the person who defines whether your guilt has been properly absolved. That dynamic gives enormous moral power to fallible humans and institutions. The impact here is simple. It creates severe incentives. Follow us or be lost. Believe this or be damned. We think true moral development happens when people are empowered, not when they're bound by fear of failure or need of rescue. But 2, it encourages meaningful change in society. Because if you believe that humans are like inherently fallen, they're of course bad things. For example, like inequality, corruption, or injustice stop being systematic problems to even solve and start being inevitable consequences of like flawed nature. That means we lose the urgency to feel real harms, like all the real harms that exist within status quo. You have no longer accountability within status quo to actually be aware of your actions. Poverty becomes a spiritual failing. Violence becomes the price of free will, and we stop challenging structures that hurt people because we think sin is just the things that they are. C, it helps the hope that people can actually do better. Because if you're told that moral failure is part of your wiring, then a success starts to feel out of reach. Why try if you're told you'll fall short? Why take ownership of your impact when it can all be pinned on original sin? That worship view doesn't create strong moral individuals. It creates resignation, cynism, and even helplessness. So what is the impact here and the weighing then? Because we win on the scale of human empowerment. So we flip their entire case because on our side of the house, we're actually able to give you a world where responsibility is now chosen and not forced. The moment in which you are born, you are moral and you are morally clean. You don't have any sort of sin that is stopping you. So meaning you can make your own path into judgment. You can make sure that you're doing good things within status quo and nothing else is stopping you because you're not born as someone who is original sin. Where virtue is meaningful because it comes from growth, not guilt. And where institutions are there to support people, not hold them hostage to redemption. For all of these reasons, we're so proud to oppose.
Thank you for that wonderful speech. Second speaker from side prop, here.
Cool. Am I visible and audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay. I'll be starting the speech in 3, 2, The first thing I want to clarify is the fact that I think Op fundamentally mistakes the predisposition to sin for the absence of goodness. And this is crucial because this is a fundamental misunderstanding of Christian teaching. Jesus literally tells us that unbelievers and sinners who refuse him have the capacity to love and the capacity to kind, and that you should still care for these individuals, right? But the difference is that uniquely on our side of the house, we consider human beings are imperfect and that sometimes we do think that is our bad, and that is to be expected. I think the problem with the entirety of opposition's case about all of the harms they introduced to you is contingent on the basis that Jesus says that everyone who doesn't follow him is bad. Everyone, right? And the second thing it's contingent on is the fact that humans don't ever make mistakes, and those that do are inherently evil, right? I think a few responses to their main case direction then. First thing is that we say that most actions are inherently good or bad. I'm not necessarily sure why they feel there's this moral gray where some actions is inherently middle good and middle bad. We say that most actions are inherently good or bad, and therefore I'm not sure as to why there's suddenly going to be a change of actions or doing better actions on our side of the house equals abandoning identity. We think this was a claim that wasn't explained on. Second thing, they provide you ridiculously unreasonable framing as to how this thing is going to be taught like, right? We say they teach it like you are faulty as a person, but you have room to be able to improve, and you can improve, and you should be doing things that help strive and like help you to improve eventually, right? We think this is fundamentally more reasonable framing because the person teaching this most likely doesn't want the person to live a life only of regret, right? So we see they're likely to teach this in such a way that people understand that I am faulty as a being right now, but I have the potential to become better if I take these things and do these correct steps, right? But second thing, right? There's an entire claim about, oh, you can't necessarily feel happiness, right? Because you continuously feel like you're a bad inherent person. First of all, we say that you can feel happiness by doing things like growing and fundamentally becoming better, right? Which means even if we have to trade off happiness, we get more fulfillment on our side of the house, right? Because you're actually doing things that can fundamentally make you better as an individual person, right? This can look like trying to become kinder, or like maybe going towards Christianity and taking some of their principles to become a better individual, right? These are things that we fundamentally allow people to be able to do on our side of the house. And because of that, you're likely to feel happiness by this growth and by ultimately becoming better. The comparative way you say that, oh, people are inherently perfect right now, people are absolutely like great, is the world in which you don't necessarily get this catharsis of growth. And this is a fundamentally exclusive thing on our side of the house. So even if you have to trade off happiness, we think that's fine because you get more long-term fulfillment, which I think is more important anyway, because it fundamentally is more likely to give your life a greater form of meaning. But the last thing I want to point out is this whole analysis that it changes the way you view the world, because you're now going to be viewing everyone as bad. Panel, we provide people a more realistic understanding. First of all, this is contingent on the already flawed framing, where they tell you you're going to give this one thing, but not provide context as to why this is necessarily going to be true, and why exactly this is very easy to believe in. Again, we think they're likely going to do this insofar as you want people to believe in Christianity, insofar as you want people to believe in this notion, which is why you're likely to get things like explaining the context behind this thing and making it easy for people to believe. But second of all, I think we still provide an objective, realistic understanding as to what this thing is essentially going to be, right? We provide like children and parents and whatnot a realistic understanding that people are fundamentally flawed. We think that people are fundamentally flawed and therefore having room to continuously improve. So I'm not fundamentally sure as to why, yes, you don't necessarily get the dream view that you have, but we provide people a realistic understanding from young, and we think that's an inherent benefit that outweighs the Lulu. Now, second and third extension then is that why the perpetrators specifically deserve forgiveness after reflection, and why you don't necessarily give it to them. Again, this right. First thing then is that why then are you fundamentally more likely to be forgiving? Two layers of analysis to prove this. First thing is that people are more likely to be forgiving, right? Insofar as you understand it is within a human nature to be flawed, but most importantly, just following this belief itself, it literally tells you that human beings are from the start very flawed. You're likely going to be able to make mistakes anyway, so because of that, you likely understand that it is within human nature to be flawed. And second thing then is that you also have less radicalist Christians who believe that if you disobey God once, you deserve to be punished, right? Why? Because if you're effectively teaching this mythology to a large number of people, what this means is more people are at the very least going to recognize that, hey, people are fundamentally flawed. We think the word of God is the fact that you should be appreciating these people instead and trying to help them instead, insofar as everyone starts off with being flawed, then not everyone is fundamentally perfect, right? Therefore, we think you're less likely to have radicalist Christians who believe this thing, right? But second thing then, I want to prove why exactly these perpetrators deserve, third thing is the fact that you're actually more willing to give these perpetrators the benefit of the doubt, right? Insofar as you understand that, hey, they're inherently flawed, but two, most importantly, you're willing to be able to understand that they may have had circumstances that may have justified these actions, right? Which leads me to my second thing, right? Why these perpetrators fundamentally deserve forgiveness. Deny. 4 layers of analysis here. First thing, people are likely to have emotionally matured over time. We say that if you did something very bad, like you were young, like let's say you bullied someone, your prefrontal cortex likely wasn't developed, right? Two, you most likely did self-reflection. Again, we say that these are perpetrators who have done reflection already and are genuinely sorry for the actions that they've done. But third thing, it's fundamentally unintentional that you did these things. And last thing, you were most likely peer pressured and co-opted into having to be able to do these things on your side of the house. The problem therefore lies is that you're less likely to take these things into account in your side of the house. When you tell people that, hey, everyone is pure, everyone is fundamentally good, which means the moment someone does something bad to you, you already view it as like, oh, why did they do this to me? You're less likely to be able to consider other possibilities. We allow people to consider these possibilities, right? Insofar as we tell them that, hey, people are already imperfect, people don't already go into these situations with the assumption that individuals as a collective are fundamentally perfect, right? But second of all, I think they also deserve forgiveness, not right under the assumption that what happens if you don't forgive them is that they're never likely to be able to move on, right? They're never likely to actually feel happy. They're never likely to be able to move on without this feeling of continuous guilt that I think Caitlyn explains to you utterly perfectly, right? Two reasons as to why this is the case. First thing is that you're continuously reminded of the bad thing you did, but more importantly, you're continuously reminded of the fact the harm that you did can never actually be resolved, insofar as you don't get that feeling of relief, which is forgiveness, right? But secondly, humans are inherently good creatures who do feel empathy, not perfect creatures like the world of Op is trying to tell you, but decent creatures who feel empathy over the things they've done, right? Again, I think Caitlyn already explains to you they are a niche group of individuals who may not feel empathy, but that shouldn't be counted within the context of the debate, right? But third thing then, right, is why don't you get that exclusively on your side of the house? We think three reasons. First thing is that people think it's an obligation to inherently be perfect. We tell you on our side of the house that it's not an obligation to necessarily be perfect, that you can't be perfect, but you can be as close to being as perfect as possible with the correct steps that are fundamentally being taken. Secondly, you didn't recognize that you don't necessarily know the scale of what you did was fundamentally what you did was wrong, essentially, right? But third thing is that you also don't have radicalist Christians who essentially force feed you guilt, right? And essentially prevent you from becoming Christian. I think how then does this materialize? This can look like things like rejecting you from coming to the church, or essentially looking down upon you, essentially, or continuously shaming you for inherently the actions that you did, right? So therefore, because of the fact that you also don't get this notion where, oh, people are inherently flawed, people are already walking into this with the assumption that they're inherently perfect. And the flaw of this mechanism is the fact that people are less likely to be understanding and to be genuinely forgiving, right? But this also means all of the benefits that Caitlyn tells you about more people going to Christianity and being accepted of it also don't materialize on your side of the house for these reasons that I've already provided. So for all of these reasons, vote for side government.
Thank you for that speech. Calling the second speaker from side up. Here.
Am I audible and visible?
Yes, you are.
Okay. Let me get my timer. All right. I will begin in 3, 2, 1. So the issue coming from side government here is clear, and that is they fail to understand that the teaching of original sin fundamentally stifles our progressive understanding of human behavior and severely hinders the development of effective evidence-based solutions and real-world problems, which is why we win today's debate thus far. And for all these reasons, I'm very proud to oppose. Before our final substantive, a few crucial responses and clarifications towards the government, right? Earlier, they asserted to us on how that with the theology of original sin, people with wrong past can reform. I just want to strategically note here on how this entire statement is purely premising on the fact that identifying an inherent and inescapable flaw automatically leads to an effective transformation rather than fatalism or passive reliance on external force. This is crucial in today's debate because because a fixed inherent sin can diminish individual agency and direct focus away from specific addressable psychological, social, and environmental factors, which are crucial for genuine behavior reform. It risks promoting an idea that reform is only possible through theologic means, ignoring human-driven rehabilitation. They also talked about how people born into a bad start is forced to sin, but that's only premising on the fact that the narrative that they were born into an unfortunate circumstance in the first place. What side government needs to argue on is how this theology will not then be exploitable to those who are not. who do not fit these unfortunate narratives, right? They also asserted to us on how theology of original sin can allow someone to repent, but we tell you that on our side, people still feel guilty and they still repent, right? So this does not stand as a benefit exclusive to government. So, and then the distinction here is how government talks about how, you are born flawed, and as long as you can improve, you are back into God's grace. But on our side, our narrative is that when you are born on a clean slate, but your environment will test you and it would mold you to become a better person who has true growth, right? The reflection belongs solely to opposition, because we take our environment as a true test to our belief, our sense of right and wrong, right? Because if your side believes that being born flawed means you always are climbing to the top just to be good enough again, how is that a fair moral journey, right? On our side, people grow not despite who they are, but because of the choices they make in a challenging world. This was more meaningful reflection of true moral growth, right? So the bottom line here is that insofar as their assertions have been mitigated by us, their claims are uncreditable, hence making their case fall, right? So onto my argument about stifling progressive understanding and hindering effective problem solving, right? I want to characterize on top of this argument just how government's world is in its best and worst case scenario. Government's world is in one which not only brings a comforting, albeit simplistic explanation for human flaws, but also a persistent intellectual inertia and a systemic disinclination to explore the true actionable causes of societal problems. Notice how even if they claim a comprehensive framework, they fail to equip us with the tools for genuine analysis and for genuine intervention, leading to a perpetual cycle where problems are attributed to a single immutable sin rather than addressing true scientific or social innovation. We still have to acknowledge that in their world, it is in its deepest implication inhabits our capacity for genuine human and societal advancements, right? Okay, now onto my layers, right? So there are a few reasons as to why their issues does not get solved. Few layers of this. First layer, it talks about how about the oversimplification and diversion of intellectual inquiry. Firstly, then, the teaching of original sin provides an oversimplified and monolithic explanation for complex human behaviors and societal problems, thereby actively diverting intellectual inquiry from their true multifactorial roots, right? This happens because teaching original sins makes us blame all of our human problems on an inherent flaw. This stops us from actually looking into real causes like psychological, like society, and like its economic and or its environment, right? This shortcut discourages critical thinking and scientific study because the problem is already considered as a fixed and religious one, right? This is important in today's debate because by solving complex global problems needs a careful, varied research and deep understanding. But when a broad, unproven explanation takes over, it stops us from actually seeing the problem and makes it harder to find a good specific solution. Second layer, hindering empirical solution and promoting fatalism, right? The emphasis on an inherent theological sin often leads to a preference for a spiritual or an abstract solution over a concrete or an empirical intervention, fostering this sense of fatalism towards societal improvement. This happens because attributing all of human suffering and wrongdoings onto an inherent sin stops deeper investigations into psychological, social, economic, or environmental causes. This intellectual shortcut hinders critical thinking and scientific exploration as the ultimate problem is seen as a fixed theological solution, right? Look, this is important because in the status quo, humanity faces urgent challenges requiring pragmatic, data-driven solutions, right? Onto my last layer, which is impending psychological growth and nuanced understanding of deviation. By framing human flaws as a manifested of original sin, the teaching can impede a nuanced psychological understanding of individual behavior and the diverse spectrum of human experience. This happens then because blaming all flaws on a single inherent sin overlook key differences like mental health issues, development problems, or even outside pressure. This is important in today's debate because in the status quo, psychological and behavioral sciences have provided immense insights into human motivation, into human trauma, and into human development, right? Insofar as we've proven this to be true, there are a few layers as to why these issues worsen on their side. On a micro level, we tell you their side will cause individuals to adopt a fatalistic view of their own imperfections and those of others, stifling genuine self-analysis and the motivation to seek practical, psychological, or social interventions, which then directly adds to the burden of confronting personal struggles through an oversimplified lens. The reason to this is because they are taught to accept an inherent law rather than dissect and address the problem by itself. On a societal scale, when the structural system relies on a theological explanation, for a pervasive problem, society will see this as an underinvest in empirical research and an evidence-based social program, leading to a less effective intervention for crime, poverty, and even mental health issues, right? On a macro level, this creates a long-term condition where global philosophical and scientific discourse is hampered by an adherence to a non-empirical, theological, and explanation for humanity's challenges, thereby hindering our collective ability to actually innovate and implement truly effective solutions on a global scale, which will then greatly affect the stakeholders in our status quo by limiting humanity's potential for rational or progressive self-improvement. Onto my impacts, right? First impact that it encourages on how our science succeeds this debate at its core, right? First impact, it encourages empirical understanding. Note that this impact is relevant because it promotes intellectual curiosity and development of a more effective data-driven solution. Second impact on how it fosters proactive problem solving, right? This allows society to actually focus resources and efforts on practical, actionable, and interventions for these social issues rather than attributing them to an unchangeable inherent flaw. This impact is true because it shifts from fatalism to a more proactive and more human-centric approach to improve the world. Third impact, it promotes nuanced individual growth, right? By moving beyond a singular theological explanation, individuals can actually engage in a more nuanced psychological self-reflection and seek tailored, effective strategies for personal development and overcoming specific challenges which do not exist This impact is crucial because it empowers individuals with a more effective tool for personal betterment, right? So if side government does not engage with the main burden on their side, and that is how, one, they can prove how their teachings do not impede, but rather enhance empirical and scientific understanding on the human behavior. Second burden, and that is how to demonstrate how their teachings lead to a more effective and more evidence-based solution for societal problems than alternative frameworks, then our case stands firm, proud to oppose.
Thank you for that speech. Calling the third speaker from side prop. Here.
Okay. Let's start. There. Hold on. Can you give me a second to get my timer? I'm just gonna be. I need my timer. All right. Really sorry about that. Let me just get my timer. Okay, PY is verbally, and I go by he, him. Start my speech in 3, 2, 1. When Paul the Apostle wrote to the early church, he told us, "Love the sinners and love the unbelievers. For before you were given salvation, you were once lost like them." And I think this is one thing that Up misses, because when a church congregation thinks that they're better than everyone else, that their own inherent virtue is what gives them the right to salvation, when they don't see themselves as sinners that are inherently as imperfect as everyone else, that is the point at which the church becomes oppressive. That is the point where it stops being a force that uplifts people. It's the point where people, instead of uplifting others out of vice and addiction, they push away the broken and they ostracize those who need them most. Very proud to propose. 2 strategic callouts that I'd like to make. And first, and no, this goes completely this goes completely unclarified in second, and there's literally no response to this. Up again fundamentally mistakes the predisposition for sin for the absence of goodness, and again, this is a fundamental misunderstanding of Christian teaching, because literally it tells us in the Bible on and on again, there are other people that Jesus doesn't agree with, but they still have a predisposition to be kind and be good to those who are good to them. This is not something that exists within Christianity on their side of the house. They're literally just fear mongering. But second, Ott's entire case is very uncomparative, and this is fatal for them because a lot of the problems they have are not exclusive to the doctrine of original sin. They still exist in Christianity, but beyond the belief that every person is imperfect. And here's why. Because doctrines such as the idea that people go to heaven and some people go to hell still exists. The idea of sin itself still exists, and the moral standards set by Judaism in the Old Testament and like the Ten Commandments still exists for the 2 billion Christians around the world. The logical conclusion of these beliefs is that some people just have more of a predisposition to sin than others. We explained as to why in the past 2 speeches that is dangerous for the church, why this turns Christians into unempathetic monsters, why this causes people to be eaten up by guilt and lose change that they can lose hope that they can change for the better. There's no honest attempt to respond to this from the opposition. Right. 2 questions I'll answer in this speech then. First, how Christians treat others. Second, on how does the self-perception of a believer change under both sides. Now, let's talk first about how Christians treat others. And I think this is really important because the delta here is really big. There's 2 billion Christians around the world. They're a large majority in a lot of communities, and the extent to which, the manner in which they treat other people is based on this teaching, insofar as they are not able to prove that Christians are more empathetic on their side and are more willing to, for example, give money to charity or just treat other people that they don't agree with better. They should lose this debate simply because of the magnitude of impact that happens under their side, right? No. There is also very little that Opt does to respond to our material on how this creates incentives for radicalized Christians to treat people badly. At the point where you believe that you are better than other people because you are not imperfect, you do not have original sin, you feel like you are better than the sinners who constantly commit sin out of their own volition or because they are by nature because they're by nature like more sinful than you. That's going to come in on weighing later, but I want to respond first to DLO's extension about lack of understanding in psychology and mental health. Here's the thing. This isn't true because all this teaching does is tell you that everyone has a natural predisposition to sin and do things that other people don't like. But uniquely, that predisposition manifests in different ways. This is why DLA's claim also is empirically untrue, because mental health services and research have historically been most prevalent in historically Christian nations. That is where we flip this, because I would posit the reason that this is the case is uniquely because of the teaching of original sin. Because at the point where people understand that you are born imperfect and there are ways in which you can improve them yourselves, that is the point at which you get more research into things like mental health issues and sociological issues. Because not only do people, first of all, they have the empathy for these people, as per the framing we characterize to no response. And absent this empathy, you wouldn't try to understand these people. You wouldn't try to like alleviate them from poverty and stop them from stealing other people's things out of necessity. We also understand it is expected that these people are imperfect, and we should find ways with which to treat them with kindness and respect. On weighing then, I think their side hurts the vast majority of people simply on the basis that a lot of people exist in Christian nations where they are likely to be abused and they are likely to be discriminated against on their side of the house uniquely, because these people are unbelievers and people believe that like they simply do not deserve salvation because it was not expected for them to commit sin, yet they committed sin of their own volition or of their own nature anyways, and therefore Jesus does not love them. And all of these like really radical Christian teachings that often happen like in the ostracizing church under their side of the house. Second question on the self-perception of a believer. And this is where a lot more of their case comes into play. They tell you that people feel bad when they're taught from day one to feel shame because like they're told that they're born imperfect, and that makes them feel bad for some reason. Let's actually take a step back. And here's the point of characterization we want to point out. People feel guilty at the point where they feel they have fallen short of their own moral standard. And this is intuitive, right, panels? If I'm not sure about my own predisposition to sin, then I feel really bad when I do sin, when I do lie to my parents, when I do steal out of necessity, because I don't know that this is normal. All I know is that I am a Christian and God tells me that this is bad and that I shouldn't do this. As far as I know, I've just done something wrong that I wasn't supposed to do. Comparatively, on our side, instead of feeling bad, you understand that you are imperfect, you accept that and move on. No, Opt cannot just frame out the feeling of guilt that people naturally have a predisposition to on both sides of the house. Because on either side of the house, you are likely to do things as a Christian which you do not morally agree with. For example, a lot of Christians are like alcohol addicts or like drug addicts or like gambling addicts, right? A lot of these people will feel guilty under their side of the house and have no explanation for it. And they'll feel, and that is the point at which they feel bad. uniquely under our side of the house, where you understand that you are an imperfect human being and you're not expected to be perfect, but you can work towards that. That is uniquely what is empowering for people under our side. Before that, yeah, I'll take that POI.
If everyone starts good, who gets to decide when someone has deviated that goodness, and doesn't that create more arbitrary moral policing than a doctrine that acknowledges flaw from the very beginning?
Okay, no, look, it's not that everyone starts good. It's that there's uncertainty on your side of the house. No one knows if they start good or if they start bad. And that was, sorry, I'll get to that as to why that leads to more fatalism under your side of the house. But who's the most vulnerable stakeholder here? And up misconstrues our framing. There are external paths for validation, such as parents, your teachers, and your achievements. Children don't constantly think about how they sin. They just accept it because it is the truth. So original sin isn't something you escape from. Like Op tells you it's permanent. It's like being born like with certain characteristics, right? It's just part of something. But Op can't ignore the people who seek religion as a path for change or as a path for redemption. These are the people you need to truly help, because giving them a second chance is the morally correct position in this case. Also, DLO comes up here and tells us that people fall into fatalism. This again misses all the analysis that Caitlyn literally gives you in her speech, because uniquely, when you believe that everyone has the same predisposition to sin, everyone is equally imperfect, right? That is when you believe that you can better yourself, because you see, oh, this person is leading such a good life. Maybe I can live a good life like him too, because we are both as imperfect as one another. You observe that other people live good lives, and other people are able to escape addiction. They just become better people. You see that, and it gives you some level of hope that you change yourself. The comparative on their side is that you just don't know. All you know is that you're a sinner, you're a drug addict, you're corrupted, and you have no reason to believe that you can change at all. Because people you see as having led better lives are just predispositioned to be better than you, or they chose to be better than you, and you simply cannot change. On WONG, I think that on their side, people feel a lot more guilt, or they feel a lot more, they either feel a lot more guilt or they feel a lot more hopeless. Because the comparative is, on their side, either you feel like you're a good person, when you do bad things, you feel a lot of guilt for it, or you believe that you're an inherently bad person who is just different from other people who live better lives than you, and therefore you fall into fatalism. You never escape this like life that you don't want. For all those reasons, vote up. Vote prop.
Thank you for that speech. Calling the third speaker from up here.
Okay, I should be audible and visible, right?
Yes, you are.
Okay. Pronounce him. POIs verbally, and yeah. Okay, let's end this debate in 3, 2, 1. Proposition says that you are born flawed, and all of your goodness is just climbing out of a hole that you never dug. We reject that, because only on our side that you are born as a clean slate, and the person that you become is shaped by how you go, by how you learn, and the choices that you truly make. That is what you call moral agency. That is what you call true growth, because true character does not come from being forgiven. It comes from being formed, right? Okay, let's really make this clear. You are not debating today in this debate, in the finals, not on the premise that everyone here is Christian. This is about the assumption that firstly, you are born imperfect, but as long as you ask for God to repent, to ask for God for forgiveness, then you're okay. And secondly, then, we simply argue that we disagree with this view, is that we would much rather believe that people who become who they are because of their upbringing and environment. I think the moment proposition loses this debate is when they trade hope for guilt, right? When they teach a child that the first breath comes with moral depth. Because I tell you, this debate is about theology, it's about actual formation. And you will begin life believing that you're already broken. You do not strive for greatness, right? That you will be damned if you do not repent. That's not what you call having moral guidance. That is just psychological harm. If you want to really go biblical kings and all of that, I think you missed the very single point when Jesus never made humans to be flawed in the very first place. Adam and Eve was never made to be flawed. They were always being clean. Just like the snake is the one that literally tempted them in the very first place. That's how sins are caused. That's a key difference in this debate, and only on our side that we tackle it. Okay, first thing I just want to point out is that they keep on claiming how only on their side they are the ones who support growth and improvement. That basically means that they're going to get more fulfillment, right? But I think that they never once responded to our analysis that, first of all, it erodes self-worth and moral motivation, especially in things such as children, right? They say it builds humility, but we say that it already builds internalized guilt. It makes them completely worthless. They never prove that this is actual development. No, thank you. Only that it literally instills fear within themselves, for the people around them, for the harmful societal narratives that it causes is such a chilling effect in this debate. This matters because any moral systems that literally destroys confidence in your own goodness literally fails by design. If they really cannot prove that original sins truly uplifts, they concede they consider to the fact that it literally diminishes that. Not that they never address the preserved power structures that these structures can enable. I think I've already argued that very clearly for our LO that if people are born inherently broken, things such as institutions that become saviors that literally breeds that the dependency, manipulation, and passivity. No, thank you. I think there's like here literally handed the keys to morality to gatekeepers, and only on our side that we say people should not hold them for themselves. This matters because a belief system that requires authority to fix doesn't liberate, right? It controls. I think they never dismantle this kind of critique, and so they never even earn the right to even call this moral progress. First, we bottled that. Original sin basically fosters empathy, right? Let's be extremely clear here. You do not need to believe people who are born sinful to show that empathy, right? In fact, we argue the complete opposite, because I tell you, true empathy comes from,
Christians are the delta in this debate. If you give Christians the 10 Commandments without telling them that they're allowed to fall short, why are they not likely to feel either extreme guilt or be really unempathetic towards other people?
Okay, let's make this very clear. Let's be clear of what this kind of doctrines really tells a child. You were told a child, okay, you were born broken. If you cannot trust your own instincts, your desires are literally inherently wrong. If you do not repent, if you do not follow the 10 Commandments, you will be damned into hell. You do not need to be fixed or repent for something outside yourself, or you'll be completely damned. I tell you, that's not humility here. That's indoctrination shame. Imagine an eight-year-old in Sunday school not being told you're capable of love and growth, but your heart is literally deceitful and wicked. Instead of learning those ethics as a journey of self-discovery, the analysis that you're missing here is that the child is taught that they're literally the problem here, that the humanity is the enemy here. I tell you that does not build humility. It literally builds self-loathing, passivity, and fear-based obedience. I want to note here, only in their world, you're told that you did because you were born sinful. The only way to fix it is to ask for forgiveness from the God. That might sound very kind, right? But it actually removes those human-centered moral responsibility. Not that it literally turns every single mistake into a cycle of basically confession and redemption. Literally externalizing morality instead of actually owning it in the first place. And let's not forget in this debate, original sin creates the very single guilt that people need to be forgiven of. They want credit for offering second chances, but in the end, their side is the only side who said that you were very flawed in the very first place. It's super ridiculous coming from their side. Let's do the comparative then, because only even in their best case, they create empathy that's dependent on shame and forgiveness from above, not human real understanding. But compared to our world, I tell you, real empathy is built on having shared dignity, context, and growth. Not because we're all equally fallen, but because we're all equally capable of doing better and grow better and become better. That ties directly to our first and second argument from LO and DLO, that we empower people to change because they believe that they can, not because they're taught that they're defective and need saving and need repentance from God. And secondly, rebuttal that they claim that acknowledging that we are all flawed, people are more open to self-change, basically self-improvement, right? But I too, this is a very dangerous distortion. Teaching people that they are flawed from birth doesn't open doors to transformation. It frames all change as a desperate escape from what you are. I want you to note here, that's not healthy transformation. That's literally guilt-driven compliance. Because let's really draw the contrast. Only in their world, change begins from self-rejection. Basically I am very sinful, right? I need redemption. But only in our world here, that we believe that they're literally inherently capable, the person that I believe that they're inherently capable, or the one that believes that they're actually capable, right? Okay, not that who is more likely to embrace moral growth. Is it the person who believes that they are broken, or second, the one that believes that they're inherently capable? And don't let opposition try to tell you that it's uplifting. It tells you that the temptation is in your nature, right? That you're expected to fail. That you literally need external salvation to be whole. I tell you that does not build resilience. It literally builds dependency, spiritual insecurity, and moral passivity. And don't let and because even if we compare between both cases, even in the best case, it might result in personal growth, but note that its growth is only motivated by shame and controlled by doctrine. On our worst case, where people can make mistakes without having fear or eternal sin, it still gives them space to change in their own terms, grounded in values, reflection, and basically communal support, right? This literally links directly to our second and third argument, responsibility. Having reform and self-awareness do not require belief in inherited evil. They require belief in people, right? But in the end, we win in this debate because we do not need original sin to tell people that they can change. We believe that they can without having to believe that they're broken first. Because even if original sin gives a theological answer for evil, it also blunts for moral urgency, right? It says sin is in the status quo and basically not you can build better, right? On contrast, our side here might struggle to explain every single moral failure, but we never stop in trying to fix it, right? Because we believe that it's truly learned, we believe that it can fully be changed, and that literally ties directly to our whole argument here and our analysis here. That's clearly been stated. The most mature societies do not internalize guilt, but in the end, they externalize problems and to try to solve them. That's what you call real accountability, and that's how systems truly evolve in the first place. I think we've already given you very clear structural reasons. We told you that original sins can evolve self-worth from the very start. I think we break this down out then because children internalize that they're not capable of doing wrong, but that they are fundamentally inclined to do so. That kind of mindset just literally builds hopelessness and not aspiration. I think for these cited things such as research, things such as punitive religious teachings, it correlates with things such as depression, things such as anxiety, and low self-esteem. They never even touch or respond on this data yet. And I think we've already explained how original sin already stifles moral agency. If your sin here is literally your default setting, then having moral success becomes a whole anomaly. I tell you, this removes responsibility from the whole individual. Why grow if your total failure is natural and virtue exceptional, right? I think it's already very clear. It undermines celebration of goodness. Under this belief, even kindness is very suspicious, right? It framed as a resistance to evil rather than natural virtue. I tell you, this means that good acts aren't seen as an authentic character, but grudging obedience. You still joy from morality here, right? And notice that they lose here because they claim as people careful. But in the end, we say that it makes them cynical, fearful, and dependent on forgiveness rather than internal compass. They literally gave us a theological of submission. I think we argued for submission growth, right? Because the bottom line here is that they defend for a doctrine that teaches fear for the self. We defend for a belief that is in the self-ability to grow. And that's the foundation of all real ethics. Thank you.
Thank you for that speech. Calling on up reply here.
Starting speech in 3, 2, 1. Even in the very origin story they cite, Adam and Eve were not created flawed. Eve didn't sin because she was born bad. She sinned because the serpent deceived her. It wasn't her nature that failed. It was her environment that corrupted it. If she truly believed she was born sinful, maybe she would have never trusted her own judgment in the first place. And that fear would have crushed the very curiosity they now claim needs redemption. Their case doesn't mechanize how we become better people. It just tells you from the start you are just broken and hope the system will fix you. Here's how Proposition tried to win. Their best case scenario boils to two claims. First, that original sin makes us more forgiving and accountable. Second, that it embraces moral transformation and redemption. Why did their line of attack fail anyways? Firstly, on empathy. This was their best attempt at moral high ground, but we think it fundamentally misunderstands what real empathy is. We said you don't need to believe you're born wicked to care about someone else's mistake. You don't build solidarity by saying we're all broken. You build it by recognizing the choice that you have, the context, and the growth that you begin with. And let's be clear, in my framing, we said that this isn't about how we want to be perceived by others. This is about the kind of person you're taught to become. Their case doesn't really mechanize empathy. It softens it. Because when failure is written in your origin story, owning your choices becomes optional. It proves how their argument on empathy was inaccessible within this round on the scale of likelihood. But secondly, on transformation. They told you that this doctrine helps people change. We told you that was not what real change looks like. Change that starts from you are broken is built on the self-rejection, not self-awareness. On their side of the house, growth means fighting your nature. On ours, growth means discovering it. The comparison here is simple. Transformation isn't meaningful if it's forced by fear. It's only meaningful when it's motivated by hope. And there is no hope in a doctrine that tells you that you're doomed from day one, the moment you take your first breath. We gave you a few winning ideas. All of them still stands. Because first, we told you why original sin damages self-worth and moral development. We told you it created humility. We told you it created shame. Their model then assumes that low self-esteem is the price of virtue. But we don't buy that trade. Because of children, for instance, this message is corrosive. You don't raise thoughtful, confident, ethical people by making them feel defective. You raise them by telling them that they matter and that they can become better because of who they are, not in spite of it. But two, we told you why it undermines responsibility and creates moral dependency. Because note how Proposition frame original sin as a call for accountability. What did we told you? We told you that it actually excuses failure. If sinful nature is the explanation for every moral shortcoming, then it's no longer your fault. It's just your fate the moment you're born. I don't understand why this is so hard to understand. That means less reflections. That means less personal growth and more reliance on external validation. Whether it's clarity, penance, or fear of damnation, you're taught to depend on others for forgiveness instead of learning to change yourself. Thirdly, then, we told you why it stifles understanding and hinders progress. They said that this doctrine explains the human evil. We told you it oversimplifies this. Look, not everything bad in the world is because people are born wrong. Some of it is trauma. Some of it is policy failure. Some of it is inequality and grief. If you say we're all naturally sinful, you stop looking for social, structural, and psychological causes. And when you stop looking at on that side of the house, you stop fixing. That's how institutions stay broken and suffering gets normalized. But let's weigh this debate then. On Proposition's best case, they give you self-loathing rebranded as discipline. But that model doesn't create better people. It creates fearful ones, unengaged with. On our side of the house, we start from faith in human capacity. We told you people are not born broken. They're born capable, and when they fall short, it's not a sin, it's complexity. And complexity needs care and not condition. Which criteria did we win on then? Firstly, we win on the scale of psychological well-being. Why? Because worthiness should never start with guilt. Secondly, we win on the scale of moral growth because responsibility only matters when it's not chosen but how you scale your life. And thirdly, we win on the scale of societal change because progress requires curiosity, not fatalism. They gave you a world where you're taught your nature is burden. We gave you a world where your nature is the beginning, yet Proposition tries to strawman our case throughout all three speakers, side with SAS.
Thank you for that wonderful speech. Calling prop reply, here.
Hello, am I visible and audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay, I'll be starting the speech in 3, 2. This debate isn't just about anyone. It's particularly about Christians. And we think this is a problem for all, because Christianity still exists. The other doctrines of Christianity, of sin, of heaven and hell, of the standard of morality still exist within the context of this debate. And this is why they never give you any comparative throughout their three speeches, because we think most of the problems they have with our side will still fundamentally exist on theirs. And we think this is something the whip has already tried to say, but yet this concept still wasn't necessarily engaged on, right? The problems they suggest will still exist within Christianity, with or without this doctrine. Therefore, this doctrine protects people from the worst logical implications of having a moral standard that most people are fundamentally going to fall short of. Without it, you don't necessarily have this certainty. You either think you're perfect or you take your own sin as evidence that you cannot fundamentally change. Again, the only case in direction where their counter model can fundamentally work is if people are perfect. Why? Because the moment you fall short of this moral standard, you're likely to feel things like guilt. You're likely to have a bad self-perception, right? These are things that were already fundamentally explained of, but again, still haven't necessarily been engaged. I think therefore, this debate falls into three major contentions. Firstly, the change in a person itself, the transformation a person is likely to go through. Secondly, a person's self-image, and then lastly, a person's self-image with the people around them, and lastly, the self-perception of the individual themselves. The first clash I want to focus on is change in people. We, on their side of the house, they push the burden to us that, oh, you're blaming one person, and this is fundamentally going to be false, insofar as they're also going to teach you that you have to be able to change, right? They also teach you that, hey, you yourself have the potential to be able to change and to become better. Therefore, I'm not fundamentally sure as to why a lot of their claim about, oh, the fact is now you're suddenly going to change the moment we tell them that you're fundamentally born perfect is suddenly going to be good. But the second thing, and I think Whip points this out, but again, it's completely unengaged on, is the fact that people have no incentive to change if they already go into the fact that I am perfect no matter what. No matter what I do, I am inherently good. I am inherently great. The fact of the matter is you provide people with the unfair delusion that they are perfect, and that is fundamentally going to be their flaw, right? You don't give people the initiative to be able to actually improve. And so far as you tell them that, oh, you're already very good, we think just telling them that you're very good and you have room to improve isn't enough of an incentive to actually let people continue working. But telling them that you are good but flawed, you are very flawed, and you have lots of room for improvement, and you can achieve improvement, is more likely to cause the transformation that I think side prop has been pushing to you in this debate. Second thing then, on people's self-image, we told you two things. Firstly, perpetrators deserve forgiveness. Again, this entire concept was completely unengaged on. We explained to you specifically the fact that that you're less likely to be forgiving, and therefore you're less likely to actually allow these perpetrators, after they already took time to reflect, to be able to actually move on with their lives. Again, this is completely unengaged on. But the second thing, right, is that people know you on their side of the house, they say that, oh, you already perceive like kindness is a bad thing, which again, I think is a huge assertion. I'm not fundamentally sure why thinking that people trying to be good equals like kindness is ultimately false. We still think that kindness can inherently be true. Again, this is a complete assertion that comes from their side of the house. But most importantly, the benefit of this that we've said to you twice is the fact that people know that these people are fundamentally flawed. And we say that you're at least not living in the delusion that people are not going to be fundamentally flawed. At least there's some level of self-awareness. And we've already explained to you why that self-awareness is good and why it's an absolute necessity. Because the only comparative that their analysis works is that people don't inherently sin. But the last thing is on the clash of self-perception. And we explained to you the fact that you're going to be guilt-tripped. You're going to be ostracized by the people around you. You're not going to be accepted the moment you have a flaw, right? And this ultimately goes, by the end of the day, uncontended on. The only thing they really provide to you is the fact that, oh, people are very, very happy because they're viewed as perfect. We've already explained to you why there's a magnitude of flaws with this. And for all of these reasons, we've also explained to you why the countermodel they've introduced to you is false. The arguments they've introduced to you have flaws. And we already weigh out everything, even being absolutely charitable, which they clearly haven't been. So for all of these reasons, so proud to propose.
Thank you for that wonderful speech. And now to officially close the debate, we may now cross the house.